Hi, this is Amanda Sanker, and together we're going to be exploring Erikson's lifespan development theory. Erik Erikson had developed a theory of psychosocial development, and this theory said that throughout the lifespan, we go through stages of development. And in each of these stages, we encounter developmental tasks that lead to a crisis. Now, this crisis is going to either offer us the opportunity for increased potential or for increased vulnerability. So, if we are successful in the crisis, then our potential in the following stage increases. But if we fail, then our potential in the following stage isn't as strong and we're actually more vulnerable, according to Erikson. And so, in this way, the success of each stage leads to a healthier individual. So, there are 8 stages of development, according to Erikson. The first stage, of course, during the lifespan is infancy. So in infancy, what we're struggling with, the crisis, according to Erikson, is trust versus mistrust. So in infancy, we're about 1 year old or less, and if an infant is exposed to a warm and nurturing and caregiving environment, then they're going to be able to develop trust. But because the crisis is trust versus mistrust, what we have to worry about is that infant not developing that trust or developing mistrust. And that can come from neglect or negative treatment of the infant. And this means that moving into the next stage, as we looked at in the previous slide, this infant is going to be more vulnerable. Whereas this infant who was raised in this warm, nurturing, caregiving environment and developed trust is going to have increased potential for development in the next stage. Our second stage of development, according to Erikson, deals with autonomy versus shame and doubt. So this stage occurs between 1 and 3 years, so it's usually older infants or toddlers. And if this child is able to explore independently and assert their own will during this time, then it's going to lead to autonomy. On the other hand, if the child feels restrained or is punished harshly for their explorations during this age, then this can lead to shame and doubt. So that's where it comes in, the crisis being autonomy versus shame and doubt, is if the child has been able to build up their autonomy, they have, as we've been looking at, increased potential in the following stage. But if they've been restrained and punished, then they're going to develop that shame and doubt and have more vulnerability in the next stage, which means it might be harder for them to achieve the next stage because they're kind of still working on this one. So moving into our third stage, this stage deals with the preschool years or early childhood. So it's about 3 to 5 years. And if the child during this time is able to engage in purposeful behavior, then they build this sense of initiative, which allows them, of course, that increased potential moving into the following stage. On the other hand, if they feel like they haven't been able to build up responsibility, they feel irresponsible, they feel anxiety about this exploration and this purposeful behavior, then this is going to lead to feelings of guilt. So our next stage deals with the early elementary years, so about ages 6 to 10, and the crisis deals with industry versus inferiority. So if a child is able to master knowledge and skills, because they're really curious at this time, they really want to learn, this is going to lead to them feeling that sense of industry. And then on the other hand, if they feel unproductive, that they're not able to explore and master these skills, this can lead to a sense of inferiority. So our fifth stage moves us on to adolescence. And this is where children are dealing with identity versus identity confusion. So it's about the years of 10 to 20. And if a child or an adolescent during this time is able to explore different paths, then they can develop a healthy identity because they've been able to really explore themselves and their environment and really make those connections. If they have not been able to do this exploration or have struggled with this exploration to a certain extent, then this can lead to identity confusion. The sixth stage, according to Erikson's theory, is the first stage that is fully within adulthood. So it deals with intimacy versus isolation. As I mentioned, it's early adulthood, so it's usually about your 20s and 30s. And during this time, Erikson theorized that adults are trying to form positive, close relationships. And so this doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, it could be friendship, and this will lead to a sense of intimacy. But if they are unable to form these friendships and romantic relationships, it can lead to a feeling of isolation. And of course, that can increase vulnerability moving into stage 7. So stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation. This is concurrent with about middle adulthood, so the 40s and 50s. And if someone feels like they've been able to positively contribute to the next generation, this often comes in the way of teaching or parenthood, then they have this sense of generativity. If, on the other hand, they don't feel like they've been able to contribute to the following generation or to the world as a whole or to their environment, then this can lead to a feeling of stagnation. And then the stage that Erikson theorized was the final stage is actually a pretty long stage. It lines up with the years about 60 and above, and it's integrity versus despair. So looking back on someone's life, if this person is able to feel positive feelings, like they've contributed, like they feel good about their life decisions and their experience of life, this leads to a sense of integrity. If, on the other hand, this person is looking back and feeling negative, then these evaluations can lead to a sense of despair. So what does all of this mean for learning? We're going to focus on the younger years here because not only are we mostly going to be dealing with younger ages, but that is what I specifically will be teaching in early childhood. So implications for learning, and especially in early childhood, lead to students seeking initiative and exploration. Those apply to those early stages. So young students are looking for opportunities to lead their own learning. They want to really be able to explore in their environment, and then getting a little bit older, they're looking for that sense of knowledge and mastery. So children may be curious and motivated to learn during this time, and keeping in mind that each of these, according to Erikson, every child at a different stage really does need something different out of their education. So that's why this first one, the initiative versus exploration, is really addressing those early stages and then moving into middle childhood with knowledge and mastery, because each classroom does need to look different. It needs to really provide the environment that supports the specific developmental needs of the children of the specific age and stage, according to Erikson. So what are the implications for teaching based on these learning implications? Well, what we've learned is that relationships are very important for especially young children. They need warm relationships from their teachers in the same way that they need them from their parents. In studies on Romanian and Russian institutions, we've seen differences in behavior between children who were either adopted from a warm environment, or for children who grew up only in their biological families, compared to children who grew up in institutions that were not warm, that did not provide their basic needs for relationships. So what we saw is that these children tend to develop attention, social, and behavior difficulties, but that this only occurs if, and for the most part, if the child is adopted after the age of 18 months. If the child is adopted before 18 months, then they do tend to be able to develop that sense of trust still in Erikson's first stage. So what we're seeing is that timeline really does line up well. 18 months is right about where that first infancy stage ends, and that's when children were working on trust versus mistrust. So being able to be adopted before 18 months still allows them that little bit of time to work on that trust, which allows them to have greater potential moving into their following stages. And so what teachers also want to make sure to provide is that opportunity for exploration. As we saw on our previous slide, children really are looking for that ability to lead their own learning. So if children are able to explore at any of these stages, then they're going to be able to move on to that next stage more successfully. So allowing this exploration can help students to gain autonomy, confidence, build up a healthy identity, and those correspond with different stages of Erikson's. And through this, they can develop that sense of importance too. And then what this all means, because they're all working at totally different stages, is that children do really benefit from teachers' observation. So if teachers are able to consistently and thoroughly observe students, they'll be able to see where they are developmentally, what their motivations are, and what they need according to their psychosocial stage. So what kind of teaching strategies might help with this? One study did a program between second grade students and senior citizens. And in this program, the senior citizens and second graders email back and forth with each other, and this really appealed to each of their developmental stages. For the second graders, these emails allowed them to build up that sense of belonging in their community as they connected with another individual. And for the senior citizens, it really contributed to their development of integrity in the integrity versus despair crisis, because they felt like they were contributing back to that earlier generation and they had that good, positive retrospective on their experience. And some other ways that teachers might consider incorporating teaching strategies that would be effective according to Erikson's psychosocial theory is to include relevant literature. So to give children representations of themselves in their literature and make sure that those representations are developmentally appropriate, that those representations of a child in a book, for example, does look like an actual child of that age, which allows children to see themselves reflected in that book and to be encouraged to further explore the current crisis that they're experiencing. Another way is to increase student responsibility. So as we're looking, for example, at that industry stage, we're wanting children to be able to maybe have classroom jobs, which will increase their sense of responsibility and their sense of connection to the classroom and that sense of belonging as well, even as we saw in the email study. And another important thing to keep in mind is to keep the difficulty appropriate. So we don't want students feeling like the work that they're doing is too simple, because that can make them feel like they're less productive and less successful in what they're doing. Or if it's too hard, then that's where that success really does come in. They don't feel like they're able to be successful. And of course, that's going to increase their vulnerability moving into the following stage. So here are some resources that we use throughout this presentation, a couple of research articles, and of course the textbook chapter on socio-emotional development, which includes information on Erikson's psychosocial theory. So thank you for listening.